Yeah, it's up now.
Okay,
So everyone is watching us.
cool.
Yep.
All right, guys, we're back.
After some technical difficulties.
Yeah, so we're just gonna take this from the top here. I'm not gonna go through all the intros again. You know who we are. We were just talking about the Sixers, and as the first team of the four recently eliminated teams that we're going to run through, certainly the most surprising, but also the least experienced. Josh, we were just talking about how it's shocking that this team lost to the Celtics quicker than the Bucks did, considering the coaching differential. Um, do you think Brett Brown is like? I mean, obviously Stephen A. Smith's whole thing about Brett Brown should be fired is totally ridiculous. Let me know if you disagree with that. But do you think that like Brown is gonna have to learn from this, just like his players? I mean, Stevens gets all the credit. Isn't there a flip side to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And so to address the thorniest issue first, Stephen A. Smith is, of course, out of his mind again. We talked about this on the podcast with Alex earlier in the week, but Stephen A. Smith was going at Brad Stevens for, not having a good play drawn up, and they just got lucky when Horford hit that game-winning layup a couple of games ago. And you can't even comprehend why he would think that. But if he thinks Stevens is just a lucky coach, then if Brett Brown gets out coached by a guy who's not good, just lucky, then maybe it does make sense to fire Brett Brown. I guess that's how the logic goes in his head. But look, Brett Brown proved himself all season long. This was a team that we were, arguing over whether or not they could get to 40 wins, and they won 52 games. Teams don't make those kinds of leaps, and this team did. And yes, a big part of that was the talent, but I think that more important than that, or not more important than that, but alongside that was the coaching. I think Brett Brown, he paid his dues. He watched this team and he put in good habits. And when they had the talent and the health together, they added a guy like J.J. Redick. They made a huge leap forward. And I think Brett Brown is definitely a big component of that. But what I think you can see from the matchup against the Bucks going to 7 and then against the Sixers would be two things. One, I think, is that the matchup. I think the Celtics had the right kinds of pieces to match up with what Philadelphia had to offer. You saw a similar thing with Cleveland just mowing down the Raptors. The Raptors aren't worse than the Pacers, but the Cavs didn't match up as well against the Pacers. So I think that's an aspect. But even more important than that, I think we're watching this Boston team grow up before our eyes. Philadelphia did that all season long. Simmons and Embiid found their level, and that's why they won 52 games. But this particular group of guys playing in this way at this level, not having Kyrie Irving around, not having Gordon Hayward, of course, for the whole season, but just a team that realistically is being led by Jason Tatum, they haven't experienced that yet. It's been Terry Rozier or other guys stepping up. And so this team is kind of forming and growing up right before our eyes. And I think that's why they're gaining momentum. They're figuring out how to play with each other. They're figuring out who gets the ball first, who gets it second, and how to execute late in games. And so I think you obviously give Brad Stevens a ton of credit because he's putting these guys together on the fly in the postseason. And so I don't know what that means for the next round, but it sure has been exciting for Boston fans.
He's right. It really has, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. And I mean, look, Alex, you can speak to this. Stevens is a guy whose playoff track record was questioned in years past, right? He's had to grow up as a coach. That seems like part of the learning process. I mean, let's get into this for Philly. First place to start is there anything of concern about this team, or are they just on the right path and everything is still positive?
I mean, Simon, this is a young team, and that's going to be what it's going to be. That obviously they
I want to get everyone's take on this. Let's say that those three guys are all on the table. Who would your priority be if you were running the Sixers? I mean, obviously we could rank them as players and say LeBron,
let's
Kawhi, guys are all on the table. Who would your
the magic of live television?
But yeah, so let me throw that out to you guys. Just going right through that. I don't know if that's future Simon, what that is. How would you rank him if you're Philly? Philly with the ball dominance of Bron versus his superior talent, Kawhi's talent over PG versus the injury history. How would you look at this? Let's say they're all options.
Josh, I'm gonna throw this one to you. Let you go at it.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating, and you don't usually have this many elite wings available, right? Like you don't have an offseason where you realistically can get 3 top 12 players in the league, top 15. I don't know where you want to put Paul George, but Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, right there in the top 5, 6. So this is a crazy kind of question. You don't usually get to ask these in anything realistic. Usually it's just think pieces. So Philadelphia has to honestly evaluate their roster and answer this question for themselves. And I think when they're doing so, there's a couple of reasons why I think Paul George would be the best fit. So I'm going to put him number 1. And I'm going to put Kawhi number 2 and LeBron number 3. Now, I understand that sounds crazy because LeBron James is the best player of the 3, and I'm not disputing that for 1 second. But what Philadelphia needs to do to establish the dynasty that they could put into place, a team that could contend for titles for the next 10 years, they have to do that through Embiid and Simmons. They can't blow it up. They can't flip Ben Simmons for anyone. They need to invest in these elite young players that they have. That's how you beat that's how you put together a team that's going to win over and over and over. Even a team like the Miami Heat that was just pieces put together had Miami Heat, that homegrown star. So I think that Philadelphia has to invest in them. And to do that, you got to put the ball in Ben Simmons' hands. Not all the time, but most of the time. That's where he's going to thrive. Honestly, he's going to play a role similar to LeBron, and that means you can't have him and LeBron. The way that LeBron makes the guys around him fit in is their second wheels, and they find their way to attack, when he's taking a rest, but they can't dominate the ball, and Ben Simmons needs to have the ball in his hand. So I think you don't want to stunt that. You don't want to make this all about LeBron. And LeBron, as great as he is, makes it all about him when he comes. So LeBron number 3, Kawhi number 2 for 2 reasons. One, you've got to trade for him, which means they need to give up assets, and they've already used assets that they may have lost with Markelle Fultz. Now, I hope that's not the case, but that cost them 2 first-round picks, the one they used on him and the one they gave to Boston. So I think you need to be careful with your assets moving forward. And Kawhi Leonard scares me a little bit, not because I think that he's concocted some crazy scheme to get out of San Antonio. Leg, he's not playing because something's not right with his leg, and maybe that will be all healed up next year. We all hope it is, because Kawhi Leonard is a lot of fun to watch, but we don't know for sure, and that gives me a little bit of pause. Whereas Paul George is a third option, spot up on the wing. He's going to play defense. He doesn't seem to have the ego where he needs to be the number 1 option, because he seems happy alongside a guy like Russell Westbrook, where you'd be surprised most guys you wouldn't think would be. And so I think Paul George is a great fit. He fits exactly what their team needs. He fits the modern NBA, and we know that he doesn't slip up in the playoffs. So they could definitely use a piece like that. So I'd go Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and then LeBron James.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think I agree with that, Josh. Agree with your order 100%. And I think just the fact of the matter is you just don't want to take the ball out of Ben Simmons' hand because, okay, let me divide this into 2 parts, because in some cases I think you do want to take the ball out of Ben Simmons' hand, and I think we saw those struggles and how well he played with McConnell. Now, I think that player is Markelle Fultz, because that's why you went and got him. That's why you compromised assets. So when you do move Simmons to an off-ball role sometimes in the game, I don't think you want to do it with a LeBron James who's going to dominate the usage, who's going to dominate all of the areas where Ben Simmons usually excels. So you don't really want to, I guess, bring in a straight-up replacement. I do think that a player like Paul George is a good fit, and obviously you want to go after as much talent as you can get. But my number 1 goal with this team, because I'm not sure that they're title window opens next season, I'm not quite sure that that's where they are yet. My number one goal is to make sure that whoever I bring in, it is to grow Embiid, it is to grow Simmons, because this is a team that's going to be competitive if they can keep it together and healthy for about the next decade. So my goal next year, if you can bring in 2 of them and you can win a title, sure, go at it. But if you can only bring in 1, maybe just make sure that Brett Brown and your organization is very firm with the idea that Simmons and Embiid are our future, and we need to do whatever we can to develop them.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and you could certainly make the case that LeBron could help ease that development by, letting those guys ease their way into being number 1 options, number 2 options. But long term, I don't think that's really the concern. I think the concern is getting them up to speed, in a natural way, and struggling is going to be part of that. Outside of that, though, what do you think about this team's offseason? We talked about the JJ Redick contract. They're going to have cap room. I mean, if they don't get one of these guys, do they want to bring in another max free agent? Do they want to save that cap room? Obviously, that cap room isn't going to last forever with extensions coming up for some of these guys. There's the whole Markelle Fultz situation. Would you look into moving him if you could bring in a win now piece? So many questions surrounding this team right now. What do you guys make of the rest of their offseason decisions?
I think that Philadelphia has to make sure that it doesn't get ahead of itself. The reality is that these guys are young. Their core is locked up for a long time, and they have absolutely no rush. And I think that if they try to get ahead of themselves and think their window of contention is right now, they're going to hurt themselves. And you look at Boston. Boston didn't rush it. Boston didn't go, oh, look, we are in the playoffs. A couple years ago, we got Isaiah Thomas. We got a win right now. No, they were patient. They kept their assets. They made draft picks. They developed guys. And look where they are now. Their window extends into perpetuity. So I think that Philadelphia needs to have that same mindset. So definitely bring Paul George in. Definitely bring LeBron James in, because if Paul George isn't coming and they're not trading for Kawhi Leonard, absolutely sign LeBron James. Like, those rankings were 1, 2, 3 out of like 450. So like, let's be honest here. But if they don't get one of those marquee guys, and really I think that might be the list. I think it's LeBron James, Paul George, or Kawhi Leonard, or maybe was another superstar that came on the market unexpectedly. But otherwise, I think that's it, and you roll it over. Maybe bring back JJ Redick on another big 1-year deal. Maybe bring in a guy like Danny Green or Contavious Caldwell-Pope. Another guy like that on just a 1-year deal. Toss around money. Go ahead and use it, but only for 1 year. Roll it over till next year, because next summer you got Jimmy Butler, you got Klay Thompson. Can you imagine Klay Thompson on this team? He's like JJ Redick, but better and can play defense. He'd be a perfect fit. So I think that Philadelphia just needs to be patient and not rush things.
Well, first of all, Josh, thank you for stealing the thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to be the hot take guy that said Klay Thompson fit on this roster the most. So you took that away from me. But I think you're totally right, and I think that kicking the can down the road may be the right play if you strike out. Because obviously, like I said, like you said, bringing in talent is going to be number 1 if you can do it. But what you don't want to do is tie yourself up on deals that are 2 years long or 3 years long for players that aren't putting you in that window. And I think that if you can bring back JJ Redick if for another year, if you can sign another an Isaiah Thomas, well, I think they need another ball handler. So maybe you bring him in on a big contract for 1 year, and then you kick the can down the road. Now, all that is, of course, contingent on the idea that you miss on Paul George and you miss on LeBron James, because this is going to be a team that is building, that is growing, and they're certainly going to be appealing, particularly if they can offer max cap space. Now, the Warriors are going to be in trouble next summer, and it's just a fact of the matter that Klay Thompson's going to have to take a big pay cut to stay there. And maybe he's getting a lot of sneaker money out of China. Maybe he is satisfied with his role. But it's very hard for me to see that all 4 of those guys are going to be there. And I think Klay Thompson would be a huge, huge asset to add to the Sixers team. And so they have a lot of flexibility. And I think you're totally right in saying that maintaining that flexibility is the number 1 thing for this roster going forward.
Simon, I just want to jump in really quickly with a question.
Go ahead. This Klay Thompson slander is crazy, though.
Slander? Excuse me, slander? How am I slandering Klay Thompson? I said he was great. He's a great 3-and-D player.
No way the Warriors are moving off of Klay. What's your question, Josh?
So we're talking about LeBron James possibly going to Philly. Of course, the Los Angeles rumors are there, but if Cleveland, let's say, goes back to the finals and loses in 5, is it possible that he stays there even with the roster looking as bad as it has if they come together enough to beat almighty Brad Stevens and get back to the finals? Like, does LeBron stay there? Is that a possibility, or are we just all in on the fact that he's leaving?
I think that's the number one. I think that's a probability right now. I
Do you
don't
think
know.
That's the most probable outcome?
I would take maybe, I put it about 50-50, that versus the field. That versus any other destination, I think I'm staying with Cleveland, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, that's fair. I think probably – I think there are a couple ways to look at this, and it's what do you think LeBron James wants? And we don't know his mind or anything like that, but LeBron – he has a really nice house in Brentwood. He has a lot of business ventures in Los Angeles. If LeBron wants to chase a title, obviously Philadelphia is the way to go. If he wants to become a billionaire, LA is the way to go. If he wants to stay loyal to his home, to where his kids go to school, to where they've grown up, then Cleveland's the path. I mean, I think that there are a lot of options for him that we can't possibly know. I mean, there are going to be reports from the time the season ends, whether it's Game 4 of the NBA Finals, Game 7 of the NBA Finals, maybe Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Who knows? But wherever the path ends for LeBron James, we're going to hear so many things from that moment forward that it's impossible to know what's going to happen. Now, I'm kind of with you, Simon. I kind of think that Cleveland might be a little ahead of the game right now, because it's going to be hard to uproot his family. And I'd heard he said something not that long ago about his kids being a big part of the decision, which is a little bit of a tipping point for me, because they're in school there. But maybe they love LA. Maybe, they spend their summers in LA and they want to go out there and swim in February, like Zach Lowe said. I don't know. And I don't think anyone knows. And I think that is the big question mark for this entire offseason, which is something we'll get into more later as we get closer to that. But I think that's one of the biggest question marks of this entire offseason is what's going to happen with LeBron James. And that's not breaking news. I mean, that's just the truth.
Right. And it's also not breaking news that a bigger question mark is what's going to happen to the team that LeBron just completely eviscerated for the second, you could say third year in a row. Let's move on to Toronto, guys. I mean, there's a lot less options than there are in Philly. I think action is also a lot more necessary. How does Masai approach this offseason? I mean, I think Dwayne Casey is the first question. And then from there, you have the backcourt. Not too much more you can do. You can try to move off of some of the contracts in your front court. But, I mean, yeah, you guys, where do they go with this?
Josh, I'm going to let you take this one first because I'm really interested in what you have to say about it.
So Alex and I discussed this also on the podcast on Monday, and it was really a big point of contention between us because you have this idea that can what Toronto has work? And I think what's going to matter here is what does working mean? Because what Toronto has right now is not going to beat LeBron. We've proven that because you put any collection of parts around LeBron and he's mowing over Toronto. I mean, this is, objectively the worst supporting cast he's had in a decade. And he just swept Toronto after they had their best season in franchise history. So we know that the Raptors are not going to beat LeBron. But I don't think there's anything they can do realistically that will allow them to beat LeBron. Firing Dwayne Casey and hiring Becky Hammond or Mike Budenholzer, Steve Clifford, that's not going to beat LeBron. And trading DeMar DeRozan for CJ McCollum or for Andrew Wiggins is not going to beat LeBron. I just don't think that they have the pieces to beat LeBron. But that's okay because no one in the East has had those pieces for 8 years. And if you move the line of what success is to be dominant in the regular season, have home court advantage, and set yourself up so that if LeBron slips or is in a different conference, you can make the finals, then I think the Raptors should keep going with what they have. I think they have young pieces. They're going to continue to grow and develop. Guys like Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby are going to become much better. I think they have a lot of upside. Fred VanVleet is young, DeLon Wright, Jakob Poeltl, and I think that you start to offload some of the veterans like Serge Ibaka, I think can go. Jonas Valanciunas doesn't necessarily need to stay on the team. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But I think this team has the pieces, and honestly, I think Dwayne Casey is a fine coach to do that, to oversee that development, and they just need to hope that something happens and the window opens up. You think of a team like the Dallas Mavericks. They happen to find that window, right between Lakers, stomping around, and the Spurs reasserting their dominance, and then the Warriors rising. There was a 1 year window where the Mavericks leapt in and they won a title. And so I think that Toronto, while I don't know if they'll be able to knock off these juggernauts in the West, I think that they should run it back. And next year is going to be that window, whether LeBron's in the East or not, before Philly and Boston really come into their own. I think you want to make a run at next year. And I think to do that, you just keep the guys you have.
I just want to jump in real quick, Josh, because you raise a fascinating point. It almost seems like Toronto is kind of a victim of being the most successful team in the East over the last few years outside of Cleveland, right? Like, no team in the East has made the finals besides the teams that LeBron has been on. But the other teams that LeBron has knocked off, he hasn't knocked off 3 years in a row because they haven't made it to the point where they play the Cavs, or the bracket just hasn't aligned itself that way. But this Toronto team was, right there in contention with them for the number 1 seed a couple years. This year they were supposed to fall off. I actually picked them to finish with the number 1 seed before this season. I really liked their offseason. I liked bringing Lowry and Ibaka back, and they were great. They had the best in franchise history. I don't know if all these other Eastern teams would have been swept in the same way the Raptors were. I don't know if we would have seen them, like, their souls get sucked out visibly on the court. There's no pun out there like LeBronto that exists. I mean, there's something specific about this LeBron dominance over the Raptors, but I don't think that really matters because it doesn't change the final outcome. The Cavs are still probably going to go to the finals a 4th straight year. LeBron still won, 90 million series in a row in the Eastern Conference. So you raise a really interesting point there, and I think that definitely has to factor into what direction Toronto goes with this.
I'm going to jump in here just for a second. The thing I want to say is, Josh, I've softened on my stance. I've grown wiser in my old age. I kind of agree with you now. While we were thinking about it on Monday, and I still reside firmly in the camp that they should blow it up. However, when I started thinking about the returns that they could possibly get, I just don't think that you're even going to stay at that 50-win threshold. And I think for a team like Toronto, teams like Memphis and Charlotte, these smaller teams that have smaller fan bases. I mean, Toronto's got a bigger one because they're Canada's team, but I think that for some organizations, it's very important to stay at this threshold of about 50 wins and be a pretty good team. And I think Toronto falls into that. And like you said, maybe they sneak in next year. Maybe a turned ankle gets them there. You never know. But for me, I think the biggest factor is that there's just not going to be great returns on Lowry and DeRozan. And then beyond that, you have C.J. Miles, you have Serge Ibaka, you have the Norman Powell contract kicking in next year. This is a team that is up against the salary cap, and I don't know how you go about fixing that, because in order to get rid of a Serge Ibaka, you probably have to package it with a first. And it looks like you're probably within 1 or 2 years of being a rebuilding team again. And you don't really want to compromise any assets like that, particularly for a team that has drafted pretty well over the past few seasons. So maybe if you can get something, our buddy Corbin has suggested that Andrew Wiggins for DeMar DeRozan is a kind of works for both teams, and I'm not sure about that. But if you can get something like that where you latch onto a younger asset that maybe you can develop within your system, then that'd be something that you could go after. But it's a very difficult proposition, and I'm not very envious of where Toronto's at as a team right now, because they sort of cast their lot with Lowry and DeRozan, and they came up short, and they've come up short for 4 straight seasons now, and it doesn't look like anything's going to change. But what can you do at this point?
Yeah, that trade that Corbin threw out there last week, God, I hate that trade.
I mean, I do too, but that's the kind of thing, Simon, that to me, that's the kind of thing you have to look for. Maybe not that trade exactly, but you have to go after young asset. You have to start to pare your way down. But to get off Serge Ibaka's contract, you're giving up a first to get out of that. That Norman Powell contract is a poison pill. I mean, they've done some things in the past couple of years in the name of contention that have really put their future in a difficult spot.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. Those contracts are going to be tough to move. We talked last week on the show, too, about maybe you move DeRozan to the Lakers. Maybe the Lakers fight a little harder than Minnesota would, and you get a Kuzma out of it. But I mean, it seems like their best path is just to ride this thing out. I was really impressed with Masai being able to sign Lowry and Ibaka. The price tag was high, but the duration was short. He got them both on 3-year deals. And it kind of felt like, okay, that's the natural window left for this team. 3 more years. Those guys are going to be well past their primes at that point. Ibaka already is. Lowry's starting to head there, it seems like. There's 2 years now left on those deals. Maybe you just ride it out 2 more years, try to build around the edges, hope some of these young guys get better. I don't think you want to start giving up firsts to get off contracts right now if a team with a young core like that.
Look, the path forward for Toronto is clear. You run it back. You win you have the best record in the regular season in the East. You beat whoever's in front of you, and when you do face LeBron, you just lock DeMar DeRozan in his hotel room. They beat the Cavs when DeRozan was off the court, right? So I think that's clearly the way to go.
Who would be the ideal coach, the ideal replacement for Casey? And I don't think Casey should get fired, but if the goal is to lock DeRozan in a hotel room, I mean, are we bringing Sprewell out of retirement?
Ooh, that's a good one.
What direction do we go with this?
I mean, I'm going to throw out a name here, and you tell me what you think about it. But given his scuffles with Drake, I mean, isn't Kendrick Perkins the guy? He's going to go out there. He's going to really put the team in their place. He's going to show them that he means business. And he might fight a couple of guys, and maybe that's the way to go, is just sort of get people energized and passionate about it by fighting Kendrick Perkins.
I actually love that.
Yeah, so there you go. Now, I have a question for you, though. While we're on the subject of Toronto, I have something. Are we sure DeMar DeRozan is good? I mean, I see the production. I see okay, I phrased that poorly. Let me take that back. Obviously, DeMar DeRozan is a very good player. Are we sure that if you have DeMar DeRozan on your roster, you are of the caliber of competing for a championship? Like, what number player on your roster? Obviously, if he's your best player, you're not in that championship window. Is he the second best player on a championship team? Is he the third best player? Because I said this last week, and I continue to say this. I'm not sure what DeMar DeRozan does that makes your team better. He is not great in ball movement. He doesn't. He shoots a lot of like really weird shot selection shots where he's 18, 19 feet. He doesn't get to the rim as well as I'd like for him to. He's obviously not a 3-point shooter. I mean, there are a lot of things about DeMar DeRozan that are sort of anachronistic. And to me, the big question is how good does your team have to be if DeMar DeRozan's on it for you to be a championship contender?
I think that DeMar DeRozan is in a class of players who have been praised much more in the past than they are in the modern NBA, because what they do is they raise your floor, not necessarily your ceiling. So I think that a guy like, maybe Carmelo Anthony, Russell Westbrook, these are guys with very obvious flaws who can shoot at a high volume and maintain good efficiency. Not elite efficiency, but good efficiency at a high volume. That's valuable when you don't have the other guys around it to take those shots. But I think that you need to put pieces there who can take those shots when it's necessary, because otherwise DeMar DeRozan is going to be shooting them, and the efficiency that he plays with is not going to be good enough. You need more high efficiency guys taking more shots in the postseason. And so I think that DeRozan helps raise the floor of a team like Toronto, so that if DeRozan's on the team, I don't think they can be bottom of the barrel, especially not with the other kinds of pieces they have around him. But I think he does limit their upside, their ability that when you're playing against the best teams in the league, where it kind of casts into light how relatively inefficient he is. There's nothing wrong with his shot portfolio, especially now as he's kind of molded it to be a little bit more modern. But it's not going to be good enough to lead a team over the hump. And I think when you try to dial down a player's volume, who's used to that kind of volume, a lot of times they end up checking out and thinking, okay, I'm just, the fourth guy here. And they're not trying on defense. They're not working as hard on offense to get open. And so I think that that's kind of the scenario. We probably saw that play out with Carmelo, who's used to having a lot of shots. And when he doesn't, he just wasn't bought in all the way. I think that's probably what we would see from a guy like Russell Westbrook if he was asked to be in a lesser role. And then you see a guy like maybe James Harden, who has learned to, be hyper efficient with that workload. And then you had a guy like Chris Paul, and he was able to dial back the volume just a little bit while keeping the efficiency high. So I think that you see like there's high volume, high efficiency players like James Harden, and that they're able to be much more successful than a guy like DeRozan, who is high volume, mid efficiency, which is valuable, but I think we're kind of seeing the limits to it. And that's why I think in general, we're starting to dislike those kinds of players more. Whereas 20 years ago, DeMar DeRozan may have been considered a top 5 player in the league.
I have to go a different direction with this, guys. I mean, I definitely see that argument, and I think there is a certain ceiling on DeRozan, certainly if he's your best player. But I actually think, and I wrote about this when I was talking about NBA awards on the 94 Feet report, how the Raptors were an elite team this year. They had the number 3 offense in the NBA. They had the number 5 defense. Now, certainly you could say the ceiling comes into play more in the playoffs when defense is ratcheted up. You're going up against the best of the best. And yeah, if you don't have a top 5, top 10 even player, you're going to lose at a certain point in the playoffs. That, Toronto's not going to get a guy like that though. But comparing DeRozan to a guy like Russell Westbrook, I actually think your ceiling is higher with a DeRozan, because while he's not able to take those hyper efficient shots on extremely high volume, he's also willing not to keep the volume at that unsustainable level that Westbrook shoots at. I mean, I think it was Bill Simmons that made the point about Westbrook, like, you can't shoot 40 times and sustain efficiency. It's completely impossible. And look, Westbrook doesn't always shoot 40 times, but 28 times, whatever it is, 30 times. DeRozan is a much more team-oriented player. He was able to step back this year, let the young guys step into bigger roles. He grew as a playmaker. He's never going to be that super efficient guy. But if Toronto, and I think it comes down to coaching a lot, if they had a way to channel what they did in the regular season a bit more in the playoffs, even if it meant featuring DeRozan a little less, he could still be that central force on a really good team that hangs their hat on defense and is good enough on offense. They have shooting. They can go to him late in games when they need a bucket. I could really see DeRozan being the best player on a team-oriented title contender, a la the 2004 Pistons.
Yeah, but okay, and that's a fair point. I mean, and I think that they were talking about that on the Ringer NBA show, that in order to build a championship contender, you have to have one of the 5 best players in the league, and there are different ways to go about it and all that. But you said the 2004 Pistons, Simon, and I think that is a very much a corner case. I can't think of, in my lifetime, another team that was built that way, that won that way. I can think of a few teams that got close. If you want to look at that 0-2 Kings, if you want to look at other teams that have been built around that principle of we don't have a great player. But the one team that actually got there without a top 5 player in the league is the 2004 Pistons. Now, if you're looking at that over the past 25 years, you're talking about what, like 1 in 1,000 that teams have been able to do that. I think that what you're talking about, it has a very, very high floor in order to get there. Like, you have to have a Chauncey Billups who can make big shots. You have to have a Ben Wallace who is an all-time defender. And I just don't see that Toronto's roster is anywhere near that. Now, I know that you were speaking in hypothetical, so I don't want to say that you're saying Toronto is that team when you're not. But I think that you have to find a certain group of guys, something like the situation, and we'll talk about this in a minute, something like how Utah has done, and put a DeRozan into a situation like that, because I don't see the rest of that roster in Toronto, and I think that it's a very, very tough hill to climb.
So let's go right there. Utah, DeRozan for Donovan Mitchell. Who says no?
All of Salt Lake City?
I do.
Josh does.
I'm kidding, guys. But so let's go over to Utah, though. The Jazz, a lot like Toronto, a very system-oriented team, rely on depth. Mitchell, you could say, like DeRozan as well, is not currently the kind of guy that's going to lead them deep into the playoffs, but he did show signs that he's going to be a much more efficient, high-volume scorer than DeMar DeRozan is, than Kyle Lowry is in terms of the volume. I guess it's a little more like Philly here. Maybe this is a team that we don't really have to talk about, like, panic moves, blowing it up, that kind of thing. They're a young team. They had a really successful season, much better than anyone could have anticipated. What are you guys looking at this offseason for Utah?
I mean, I think that this is a team that has a lot to build. I'm pulling up their salaries now. I have it pulled up over here. They're 83 million committed right now, so they don't really have a ton of flexibility unless they make some moves. Obviously, Derek Favors is coming off the books, and they have a decent draft pick. I feel like I'm just sort of talking through my hat at this point about their draft pick, even though I shouldn't be. Yeah, 21. And what I was going to say about that is this is a team that has consistently found quality players later in the draft. I mean, Gobert came in at 28. They got Mitchell at 12. They got Gordon Hayward at 7 or 8. I mean, this is a team that over the past decade has shown that they can do a lot with a little. And I think that that's the way that this team's going to continue to improve is add a piece here, add a piece there, draft a player who turns into a pretty solid player the way Donovan Mitchell has, or an all-NBA player the way Rudy Gobert has. And they will continue to evolve in that way. Now, the question is how good is that going to be in the Western Conference over the next couple of years as some of the younger teams start to rise? What is your ceiling with the Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell team? But I certainly think that they need one more piece, but for teams like Utah, it's really hard to go after a guy in free agency, so maybe they have to put together a package to get a guy. It's really, really hard for them to lure LeBron James to play in Salt Lake City when he can play in Los Angeles or in Philadelphia. So I don't think that that's really an option, but they have to hit all their marks, and they have consistently done that over the past decade. And I think there's no reason to believe that that trend won't continue because with Quinn Snyder, with Dennis Lindsey, this is an organization that prides itself on doing the right things and doing the small things that reap the biggest gains. And I think they will continue to do that. And there's no reason, like Josh said about Philadelphia, there's no reason to panic. There's no reason to try and move up your window. You've got a really young core. You can let it develop and just sort of see where it goes from there.
I think that Utah is in great shape. And now, are they going to be able to win a title? That's really going to depend on Donovan Mitchell and his development. Is he going to become a top 15 player in the league? Is he going to become a top 5 player in the league? I think that's what we're going to have to find out. And I mean, every challenge put before him in his rookie year, he took out, and he overcame it. He kept going. He kept getting better and better and better. I mean, did you watch him close out Game 5? And he destroyed James Harden trying to guard him. He outscored Houston 22-21. He out by himself in the third quarter of that game. He did not want to go home. And so when you've got a guy that talented who adapts and learns that quickly and has that competitive drive, I think that their future is incredibly bright. But I think it's really going to depend on how good of a defense they can have to be elite defensively, and then how good Donovan Mitchell is to lead their offense. And ideally, they need another guy to kind of develop to be that piece. I think Joe Ingles is the perfect kind of fourth man, hit shots, play good defense on the wing. I think Rudy Gobert is, kind of on the outside of the top 10 conversation just for how good he is defensively. It's possible he still is the best center, not still is, but that he would be the best center in the league if you kind of broke it down in that way. I think it's close. I think it's really tight between him and Towns and Embiid. So I think it's a good discussion. Sorry, Alex. And Al Horford, of course.
Yes, so, exactly.
So I think it really depends on how good can they be if Rudy Gobert is their second best player, and then who steps up as their third best. Is there still upside in a guy like Dante Exum to become better? Can they hit on another, draft pick who's going to kind of improve and step into that niche, kind of like, Mitchell unexpectedly did this year? I think that's going to depend. The influenza here. So I think you're going to need another guy to step up for them to win a title. But I think for a team in to be in this kind of place, I think is absolutely a win. And so I think that they should feel good about how things are going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that they're in a pretty good spot. I think there was a low-key big moment for them, and that was adding Jae Crowder. Jae Crowder's not a great player, and I've said that for a long time, but what Jae Crowder does bring is a little bit of spit and vinegar. He is going to go out there, he's going to play hard, and maybe he's going to get into a little bit too much. But for a young team that's sort of developing, adding a player like that who is a 3-and-D guy, who is willing to get into it, mix it up with other teams' best players, and sort of cause trouble, I think that that's sort of the mold of guy you want to find to put around this team, because they have a chip on their shoulder, whether it's Rudy Gobert being drafted 28th, whether it's Luke Kennard going in front of Donovan Mitchell, the Rookie of the Year, whatever it is, they have a chip on their shoulder, and I think that that's something they're going to want to harness going forward and really play that up. And maybe they can't add big pieces, but adding these smaller role players who sort of fit the mentality, the blue collar mentality of the town, it's gonna vibe really well with the fans. And then of course this is going to be a tough place for people to come and play, as players have said for so many years. So this is an organization on the rise, and I think they have a lot of flexibility in terms of like how they want to add to the core, provided they're not chasing a big star. I think that adding a couple 3-and-D pieces, adding another Joe Ingles, digging up another Joe Ingles off the Clippers scrap heap if you can get one, is something that this organization has proven that they can do over and over, and I think they're going to continue to do it.
Tyrone Wallace is going to Utah. You heard it here first.
I mean, Royce O'Neal, that's a perfect example of it. Doing it again.
No, but so I mean, my Jabari Parker influenced cough came for a reason here. You're talking about Utah not being able to attract free agent talent. I think they have to go A, the restricted free agency route if they want to bring in established talent, and B, maybe a guy with a bit of an injury risk that you don't have to pay top dollar for, and maybe his team doesn't want to match on. To me, Jabari Parker, I said this months ago when the report came out that the Bucks were unlikely to bring Parker back. I said this on a podcast. Utah is the #1 team that makes sense, because the Jazz need to find a way to add another guy who can get buckets. And you laid out the reasons that's going to be difficult for them. Now, bringing in a guy with injury history, extreme injury history, I might add, doesn't seem like a good mix for the Jazz, who are a bit snake-bitten health-wise. But at the same time, I mean, the premise, the idea of Jabari Parker at the 4 next to Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, Joe Ingles, Rubio, I mean, especially the defensively engaged Parker we saw this postseason, that's got to be like kind of the best upside play I can think of for this.
You forgot about one major part of this, Simon, is that Jabari Parker is also a Mormon. That's the other big part of this that you have to talk about, is Jabari Parker is a Mormon going to Salt Lake City. Yeah, I mean that just makes sense, man.
You're right. Wow. This is gonna happen now.
It's getting deep.
It's crazy. No, seriously though, do you guys think that like that would be a smart investment? Obviously, assuming they could get him at an affordable price.
Josh, you handle this one. You're the Bucks man.
I think it makes sense. I think Utah needs another offensive creator. Jabari Parker can absolutely be that. The Jabari Parker from the last 5 games of the Boston series was really good defensively. Not elite, but he put in a lot of effort. And when he has the effort and the concentration level, his athleticism allows him to be impactful. And so if that Jabari Parker can show up on a regular basis and he can hit 3-pointers at a rate, he was hitting them prior to his most recent injury. And if he can, kind of fit in as the #2 guy alongside Donovan Mitchell and stay healthy. I mean, a lot of what ifs, but they're not unrealistic what ifs. And if all those come together, then Jabari Parker could absolutely be the kind of player that Utah needs. The question is Milwaukee serious about letting him go? And I don't know that they are. I think that they may desire to keep him. They've kind of played things more conservative in that way, re-signing guys, even, thinking back to Miles Plumlee. They re-signed him and then got bailed out by Charlotte, valuing him for some strange reason. And so I think that Milwaukee's very conservative and are going to be more likely to bring back a guy like Parker. And so what kind of offer does Utah have to make to pry him away from Milwaukee? And then does that end up being worth it? Because signing Jabari Parker now means they're locked in and don't have flexibility to maybe add a guy down the road.
Let me ask you this, Josh, sort of to take off on that, because do you play Jabari Parker as a 4? You and I have disagreed about this. We've talked about this through the season. I thought that Milwaukee's best lineup involved, once Parker came back, involved him playing the 4, and the numbers didn't necessarily bear that out. And I feel like maybe it's just small sample size. But we saw a little bit more of it in the playoffs, where you went with these small Thon Maker, Giannis lineups, where you put a little shooting around Giannis, and Jabari Parker was a part of that as well. If you bring in Jabari Parker, A, is that an upgrade over Derek Favors? I feel like it is. And then B, is he the natural 4-man, or do you want to play more at a 3 as somebody who's watched him all year long?
I think Jabari Parker is absolutely a 4. And that's the problem that Milwaukee has, is that if they re-sign Jabari Parker, two of their best three players moving forward play the same position. And then your next guy, Chris Middleton, plays the 3, so it's even harder to shift. You have got to shift down and put Giannis at the 5, and that's not something they want to do long term. So if you look at Utah, I think Jabari Parker would be the 4. I think if you sign him, you let Favors walk, and you try to go smaller, more mobile, kind of more modern in that field. And you've got a forward rotation with Jabari Parker, who can be paired with either Jae Crowder or Joe Ingles, which I think will help a lot with his defensive deficiencies. You let Parker, take on the less scary guy of the two wings, of the two forwards that the team trots out against them, and let Ingles or Crowder take the other. So I think the more we talk about it, the more it looks like an attractive fit. For Parker, it's all going to come down to, does his effort on defense stay there, and does he stay healthy? Because if he does, he could be awesome at the 4 for Utah, and could set them up to have the offensive pieces they need to propel them with this defense around them into the top couple of spots in the West.
All right, guys. Let's. So Jabari's going to Utah. We can cross that one off. Let's quickly move on to the last team that was just knocked out. That's the New Orleans Pelicans. New Orleans offseason. Obviously, the big question is DeMarcus Cousins. I don't want to spend too much time on that because we can talk about a theoretical fit there if DeMarcus is healthy, but in terms of what kind of DeMarcus they're going to get, who knows? Guy coming off a torn Achilles. Obviously, that's going to affect his value. I guess where we should start is, let's say DeMarcus, let's say they bring DeMarcus back and they get a similar version of DeMarcus to what they had this year. Would they still be, would that be the best move? Should they be looking more for a wing? I was just talking to some guys recently about this DeMarcus Cousins for Otto Porter trade that the Ringer, I think Jonathan Starks put this out, unfortunately, because I'm not saying I was that original for it. Everyone's talked about Boogie going to Washington for a while. People talk about Washington needing to get off one of their max 3 guys. What do you think? What direction do you think they go with this? Let's put Boogie's health aside as much as we can.
I think that you have to bring him back regardless of what you think about him, because we've talked about how teams acquire assets, and New Orleans is another one of those teams that doesn't have a ton of ways to acquire assets. And maybe you bring Boogie back and maybe he's not what he was. That's going to be a possibility for a guy his age, his size, with the injury that he had to his Achilles. But maybe you bring him back and he is a good fit. Maybe he is back to what he was playing in this New Orleans system earlier this year. And if that's the case, then you probably can turn him into assets. But at this point, there are 3 paths in the woods that you can follow, and one of them is let DeMarcus Cousins leave for nothing, which seems like a pretty terrible path. The other is bring DeMarcus Cousins back and rehab him and put him together with his team and sort of see where that goes. And then the third path, which I think is something you consistently explore as an NBA franchise, is bring him back, let's continue to play the field, get his rehabilitation to where it needs to be, and then as the season starts, or as we start to take shape with Anthony Davis playing the 5, which is ideally where you want him to be, let's maybe see if we can make some phone calls about DeMarcus Cousins. And I think that's the path you have to go, and you probably have to give him the max. And you probably have to just bring him back and hope that he is what he was, because you're just not, again, like Utah, you're just not a team that's going to bring in a ton of talent because of the location, because of the ownership situation, because it's not a huge basketball city. Like, all these things sort of work against New Orleans. And the only thing that they have going for them right now is they have Anthony Davis, and even that looks a little bit tenuous if they can't produce a little bit more than what they have over the past few years.
So you're talking about the Blake Griffin route, basically.
Yeah, I think you have to do that, because what other option do the New Orleans Pelicans have with that? Can you honestly see a situation where you just let DeMarcus Cousins walk away for nothing? Because I don't think that is a possibility, and I think that is basically you just sign Anthony Davis's plane ticket to Boston, to San Antonio, to wherever, to LA, all these rumors that you will hear when he decides that he's done. Because if you let him walk away for nothing, maybe
San Francisco.
No, absolutely not. Overruled. But the truth is like, if you let DeMarcus Cousins walk away from nothing, aren't you just packing Anthony Davis's bag at that point?
Yeah, I think that if you're New Orleans, you absolutely have to keep the asset. And letting DeMarcus Cousins walk, even when they gave up a modest amount in trade for him, would be unthinkable. You've got a player that talented, you try to bring him back. Now, I don't think you got to give him the max. I don't think anyone's offering the max to DeMarcus Cousins. If they do, well, good riddance. But otherwise, I think they can bring him back on a deal that's maybe less than that, maybe somewhere in the 18 to 20 range annually. Bring him back maybe on a 3-year deal with partial guarantee on the third year. I think there's ways to make this work where Cousins can still cash in a limited market and hedge against the fact that when he comes back, his Achilles just might not be healed to a point where he can continue to be elite. But I think then you are very open to moving him because, look, this team does work at best with spacing completely around Anthony Davis. And so I think if you could get a wing in there who can space the floor a decent amount, maybe you bring back Cousins as well, and you let a guy like Rondo walk, slide Holiday back to the 1, and now you got Etuan Moore at the 2, a shooter at the 3, and you go from there. And then I think that the Blake Griffin deal showed us, and numerous other deals, every single year an overpaid star is traded for because a team sees something valuable there. Blake Griffin was traded. Dwight Howard was traded. Charlotte actually gave up decent assets, not anything crazy, but they actually gave up value to get Dwight Howard instead of realizing that he was an onerous contract. So I think this happens every single year. Stars with name power, it doesn't matter how much they're getting paid. Teams will trade for them and will give up value for them. And so I think New Orleans should re-sign Cousins so that they have that option. And look, it could be that this team plays best with Mirotic at the 4 and that having Cousins there will slow them down. But I also think that Davis and Cousins were really good together. And when you have two players that good, as we're seeing at the other side, sides on the court with point guard with James Harden and Chris Paul, they make it work. Players that good make it work. And I think that New Orleans was playing very creatively on offense and they were making it work. So is there an easy answer here? No, because Cousins just might, not have it after this injury. But I think if you're asking whether or not they should re-sign him, they should absolutely re-sign him. And then the question will be, who else can they get, and what do they do with Cousins?
What do you guys think, just for a hypothetical here, totally off the wall possibility? What do you think about sending him to a team like, say, Sacramento for like a shooting wing, maybe like a Buddy Hield type of guy? Come in and space the floor. How do you feel about that?
It seems like a good idea. I would want like an asset. I would want like a De'Aaron Fox in that trade. So, I mean, I just don't think a situation where you're going to get Sacramento go for it, though.
Yeah, they're not parting with Buddy. Guys, do you have anything more on New Orleans, or should we hit on these conference finals series?
I'm ready to go on conference finals. Josh?
I had like 12 more points on New Orleans, but we'll just get to those next week.
All right, guys. Let's start in the West. I think that's the series that everyone's really hyped about. I was thinking, like, is this the most anticipated series that the Warriors have been in? Certainly the OKC series is going to be tough to top, but at the time that wasn't quite as hyped up. The Thunder had a few years down. They were reaching their apex a little bit subtly. This Houston team, on the other hand, was the #1 seed this year. The Warriors were down a bit. This matchup has been like anticipated since opening day of the season, although people are starting to act like Houston was like obviously going to make the conference finals from day one. I thought they would. I don't think everyone thought they would. San Antonio was in the mix. OKC was in the mix. That being said, how excited are you guys for this matchup? And just give me your thoughts. I have a million things to say about it, so just give me your thoughts.
Okay, I'll take this one. Dead air scares me. I don't want any dead air. I'm pretty excited for this. I mean, I said it 6 months ago. I said it however long ago that I thought this was going to be the Western Conference Finals, and I think the Warriors are going to win, and I have not reneged on that at all. Like, I think that this is a 6-game series. I think the Warriors are just a little bit too talented, and I think the Morey experiment is just not quite where you want to be, even though I think the growth of Clint Capella is a huge factor in this because I really don't think the Warriors have anybody that can check him. I mean, they're going to throw some different looks at him. They're going to use David West. They might take Jordan Bell off ice, off the ice block that he's been on where it seems like the whole playoffs, and use somebody like that, just sort of throw at him. But I think that ultimately they can live with the Clint Capella possessions because it's the old 2004 Olympics when the USA lost and won the bronze medal, was that we were trading threes for twos in those days. And I think that's sort of what the Warriors will live with on those Clint Capella possessions. And then outside of that, I think that they have enough guys who are lengthy, who are switchy, who can sort of chase three-point shooters off their looks and give the Rockets a little bit more trouble than what they're used to. And I mean, I looked up the numbers for this, and I felt like after I looked it up, I don't know why I wasted my time doing it. I looked at the regular season numbers, and they are what they are. I don't think that they're indicative with Steph missing a game, with Chris Paul missing one of the games. I don't think that the numbers are indicative of what this series is going to be, and I think that mostly that's because we've seen a little bit more of a locked-in Houston. We haven't really seen a locked-in Warriors, and I think that's what you're going to get in this series, particularly if Steph Curry's healthy.
So I want to kind of talk through the narrative here. You've got a team that won an incredible amount of games, many more than was expected to be the number one seed in its conference. It's led by a dynamic backcourt with two guards who are thought to have underperformed in the postseason to this point. And in the first round, they played a team that was very talented with a max contract, small forward who isn't felt like is living up to that deal. Right now I'm describing the Toronto Raptors, but I could have been describing the Houston Rockets, right? And if one thing goes differently and the Cavaliers win a game and Philadelphia played Toronto, or Indiana managed to close out and they played Toronto, is it that unrealistic to think that Toronto could have won in the second round in 5 games and be in the same place as Houston right now? Now, I'm not trying to say that Houston and Toronto are the same team, but I think that we don't yet know if Houston's incredible regular season success, and it was incredible, and they played very well, and they absolutely deserve to be here and deserve to be talked about as having a chance to beat the Warriors. They absolutely deserve that. They've earned it. But we don't yet know if Chris Paul and James Harden in this combination works against the elite teams. They played a Utah team that played incredibly well, to get into the playoffs and to beat the Thunder, but in the end were led by a rookie in scoring and had multiple guards go down like every single game to injury. So I don't think the Rockets have been tested quite yet to the extent that the Warriors are going to test them. And I think that it's possible the Rockets are up to the challenge, but I think it's also possible that having Andre Iguodala, Draymond Green, Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson all guarding the players that Houston's trotting out there, that they won't be able to score as efficiently as they have been. And these step-back isolation shots are just not going to fall the way they want them to, and that this ends up being a really quick series. Now, I hope that's not the case. I don't really even expect that to be the case, but I think we have to discuss it as a possibility because this Houston team we haven't seen push past adversity in the playoffs yet.
Yeah, guys, I'm going to have our editor-in-chief, Eric Spiropoulos, come on my podcast tomorrow and talk about the series. I don't want to give away too many of my takes on that. I also am going to be writing a preview for Hoops Habit, so I'm going to keep some of those, to be revealed later.
Stop getting plugs in the middle of the show, Simon.
Why else am I on this show, Alex?
Just stop getting plugs in. That's not what this show's about. Just tell us your takes.
That's all this show's about. No, but I do have one take that relates specifically to what we're talking about here. And that's the question of, Josh, you brought it up with, Houston's they haven't proven it mentally. I related this to Toronto in a different way. And that's that the same way that Cleveland is in Toronto's head, you could say. The Warriors were in the Clippers' heads for years, and they're kind of in the Rockets' heads too. And now Chris Paul and James Harden have come together. They're much stronger than they were independently. I think on paper, these teams are a lot closer than people are giving them credit for. The Warriors' Big Four, huge advantage over Houston's Big Four, whoever. I mean, they don't really even have a Big Four. Eric Gordon, I guess, would be the fourth guy.
Green. Shout out to Patrick Oxford if he's watching. Joe Green is their Big Four.
All right, I'll take it. But look, Houston has the depth. Clear depth advantage over Golden State. They have, I think, a better backcourt at this, especially with a compromised Steph. They have a better backcourt. And I think that they might have less weaknesses on the floor. Although, here's the thing. You mentioned why you weren't going to look at the stats in the 3 matchups, Alex. The biggest reason to discard those 3 matchups is the Warriors lineup that they're going to start. The death lineup, the gentrified death lineup, the Hamptons 5, whatever you want to call it. They played 0 minutes in those 3 games. 0 minutes. So we have not seen Houston deal with this lineup that just eviscerated New Orleans. And then back to the mental side of it that Josh was talking about. The reason I think that the Warriors have to be favorites in this series, I'm not convinced at all that they're going to win, but I think the reason they have to be favorites is that if the Warriors get off to a good start, if they win game 1, let's say, Houston goes into panic mode. They start to doubt themselves. They start to feel like Josh said, they hadn't been tested yet. Okay, this is what we really are. Those guys might go into their shell. I could see the Warriors winning this in a sweep or winning it in 5 games. On the flip side, let's say Houston wins game 1. Let's say Houston wins game 2. I still don't think Houston has a mental edge. I don't think Houston has a mental edge until they win their 4th win, because we've seen what the Warriors have done. We saw what they did to OKC a couple years ago. We know how mentally tough this team is. We know when their backs are against the wall, how dominant, how historically dominant they can be. And remember, they did that 2 years ago to OKC without Kevin Durant. Even if Houston comes home up 3-1 going into game 5, I still think the Warriors are right there in the series. And I think because of that, because they're not going to be out of it until it's literally over, it's impossible not to favor them.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's a very understated point, that while we want to put to bed this narrative that James Harden and Chris Paul are chokers, or they can't get it done in the playoffs, or all of these things that we've said for a long time, they do exist, and they exist for a reason. These are players that haven't gotten it done, and I think that sort of lends itself to what you said there, Simon, that until the final buzzer sounds in game 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, until they are beaten, they're not beaten. And I say the same thing about LeBron James, is I'll believe that the Warriors aren't the best team in the West when they lose, and not 1 second before. And it just speaks to the mental toughness, how long that Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, Draymond Green have been at this for this will be the 4th season, with a couple of seasons before that as they grew into it. This is a mentally tough group. This is a group that knows how to win through adversity. This is a group that has been there, and this is a group that is immensely talented. And they might have the most unguardable player on the planet in Kevin Durant. And I think when you sort of look at all those factors together, it's very hard for me to see a path that Houston can get there. I mean, obviously they're going to hedge their bets, and they're going to try to outshoot you 4 out of 7 times and hope that they roll the dice and can roll those 40% nights, 50% three-point nights that they have done so often in the regular season. And I think that's a fair bet, and I think that sort of flipping the table and trying to win in an unconventional way against the Warriors is the best way to do it. But I'm not entirely convinced that there is a way right now in the modern NBA for any team to beat the Warriors in 4 out of 7 games. And I think that's where we are, and I think that this is probably going to bear itself out. I think if you're going to put me on record here, which you did not ask, but I'm going to say anyway, I think this is probably a 5 or 6 game series, and the Warriors are going to take it home. But you never know, and maybe I'm wrong. And so I guess I'll just mark the tape and play this for you when Houston's going to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, I think that probably the most fascinating matchup for me is not any of the stars on the Warriors playing against a player on Houston. I think it's Andre Iguodala guarding James Harden, because Andre Iguodala is canny, and he's crafty, and he gets into a guy's head, and he knows exactly the ways to stop him from getting where he wants to go. And so if Harden likes to drive left, Iguodala is going to take that away, but not in a way that gives him the right. And I think he's just underrated in that way. And this is why they re-signed him and brought him back, because they don't have another guy on this roster who can play defense the way that Iguodala can. And look, Harden's had plenty of guys try to guard him, but I think Iguodala is special. I think he's unique. And I think that if he can stop James Harden, then I don't think that Chris Paul is going to be able to dominate otherwise. I just don't think that he'll be able to, suddenly take over in that way, because there's a guy like Klay Thompson who's going to D him up. And you got Draymond Green, maybe blitzing on the pick and roll. And you've got Kevin Durant with his long arms. It snowballs. And defensively, they overwhelmed the Pelicans. And I think there's potential for them to do that even against a team as talented as Houston. Now, all that being said, Clint Capella, I think, is an X factor for Houston, because he dominates the vertical space. And so that means that Draymond Green can't be caught out of position, because if he is, lob, dunk, or bounce pass, dunk. or easy layup. Clint Capella is gotten really good chemistry with both Paul and Harden being in the right spot at the right time around the rim. And so Draymond Green's going to have to drop back to make sure he's checking Capella, and I think that could open up some cracks for Houston to score. And on the other end, Capella can guard the rim very well, and he's very disciplined. And so I think that he's not going to be giving up open lanes to the rim the way that Anthony Davis was, because Davis will get excited, he'll get out, he moves his feet really well, but he'll get out of position and leave backdoor cuts and routes to the basket open. So I think that there's definitely possibility for Houston to push this all the way. And honestly, Houston has the chops to win, but in the end, I just think the Warriors have too many good defenders. They've been here before. Like you guys were saying, they have the mental edge, and they've got two of the three best players on the planet in Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. And ultimately, I think that's what will win them a series.
There's stuff to talk about with Boston, Cleveland, but Alex, outside of celebrating what Boston's accomplished here, I think that I'd like to stay on this series for a couple more minutes, if you guys don't mind. I think we should get a little granular with this because, Josh, you brought up some really fascinating strategical wrinkles. We saw in 2015 when the Warriors went to that small lineup in the finals against Cleveland, and the Cavs tried to punish them with size with Timofey Mozgov. They would feed him out of the pick and roll. They would go to him in the post. And Steph Curry and the other Warriors wings, but particularly Curry, was kind of able to make himself a defensive plus in that series by just dropping down quick and getting his hands in there and stripping Mozgov. Clint Capella is a more skilled player without a doubt. But do you think that if the Rockets try to, feast on the Warriors' small lineup by going to Capella inside too much, that they're kind of playing into Golden State's helping hands, so to speak? It's open.
Okay, I'll jump into that. I think that there are a lot of strategic elements to not matching Capella. And by the way, I just want to start by saying what a funny world we live in, where Timofey Mozgov was playing a significant role in an NBA Finals just a couple of years ago. It feels like the NBA, honestly, that first Cavs-Warriors series feels like about 10 years ago to me now when I sort of think back on it, just how we've changed and how the game has evolved even in the past couple of years. But anyway, I think that there will be a lot of chess in that where the Warriors would like to check Capella, because Capella has been an incredibly effective roller. He's strong. He's got a ton of vertical gravity. And he actually is one of the very few guys who can sort of stay on the floor and switch and guard shooters and do that kind of thing and still be able to protect the rim, which makes him the model center. However, I think that the Warriors will probably just sort of play ships in the night with him, and he'll do his thing, and that'll be okay, because if Clint Capella's beating you, then James Harden's not beating you, or Chris Paul's not beating you. And I think those are much more dangerous weapons. While I totally agree with you, Josh, that I think Capella is the X factor and he has to play well for them to win this series, I think that the Warriors defense has always sort of been that New England Patriots bend but don't break, give a little here, give a little there, and sort of come out with it with a win, because you can switch, you can do it when it matters, and you can lock guys down who are going to have the biggest impact. And I think that that's ultimately what they're going to be able to go with, is just sort of play around Capella. Don't necessarily play Zaza Pachulia. In fact, don't ever play Zaza Pachulia. But, you just sort of play around Capella and let him do his thing, and check him when he rolls, and get physical with him, and get David West in there and let him mess with his head a little bit. But other than that, I mean, what can you do? And then why sort of play in the mud with Houston in that regard?
I mean, realistically, if you go down the line, which team has the better point guard? If Steph Curry versus Chris Paul, I think we're going to give the edge to Curry if he's healthy. At the 2, definitely James Harden over Clay. And then at the 3, Iguodala, I mean, you're going to take him over Trevor Ariza, PJ Tucker, whoever they start. At the 4, you're going to take Kevin Durant. At the 5, you're going to take Draymond Green. At coach, you're going to take Steve Kerr. So I think at some point, as you're going down the list here, you're just overwhelmed by the fact that the Warriors just have more guys. They have more elite players, and as good as Houston has fashioned a scheme around the players they have to maximize their talents, and as great as they have played, the Warriors they've got more guys. I just think they do, and they've got options they can pull out. Like Jordan Bell, could he come out and just give them really good, 5-6 minute stretches of just high energy, jumping around, blocking shots, making dunk? Absolutely, he could. David West could just come in and hit 3 or 4 pick and pop jumpers in a row. Like Houston doesn't have these guys who can just step in and make that kind of impact. And look, we've seen Golden State lose one series in the last 4 years, right? And for that to happen, they had to lose their starting center to injury. Draymond Green had to get suspended for a game. They had to have one of the 2 best players in NBA history go off for an all-time series. And then in Game 7, they had to have Harrison Barnes shoot 1 of 11 from the field. And so, honestly, if Andre Iguodala and Draymond Green don't combine to shoot 1 of 11 from 3, I don't see how Houston can guard what the Warriors have. And look, that was without Kevin Durant, and they have Kevin Durant now. There is no Harrison Barnes even on the court. So, and for every time, if you're going, hey, maybe Draymond Green, maybe Andre Iguodala will miss those shots. Well, hey, what about PJ Tucker and Luc Richard and Mbah a Moute on the other side? Are they going to hit their shots? They better, because you're banking on them hitting at a higher percentage than the Warriors, semi-offensive role guys. And then James Harden and Chris Paul outscoring Klay and Steph and Kevin Durant. Like, I just think that the narrative of this is how Houston would win gets stretched thinner and thinner and thinner once you kind of go deeper in on it. And I think right now LeBron has earned the right for us to pick him to win every series in the East, and the Warriors have won the right for us to pick them to win every series in the West. And Golden State has done nothing to make us doubt that. It's all on the fact that how good Houston has played, and even as good as they have played, I mean, you got to knock the Warriors off. I think, like Alex was saying, for me to believe that they will lose.
Yeah, certainly no disagreement here. That's a good transition though for us, Josh. I mean, is this as simple as until LeBron loses, we're going with the Cavs here? I actually think the Celtics have a chance in this series. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much time we want to spend on this, but do you guys have any thoughts on the Eastern Conference Finals?
I've got like a book of thoughts. I mean, I've just got pages on pages on pages of thoughts that I've written down, and in ways.
Celtics rule.
Exactly. It just says Brad Stevens. The best, sort of off subject, the best tweet I saw, somebody tweeted that the best play call for Brett Brown would be to call a play where Brad Stevens drew up a play. And I think that sort of universally holds true for Brad Stevens, that Tyronn Lue's best play would be to have Brad Stevens come draw up a play for him. But listen, let me start and clarify and say it's going to hurt me, but I'm going to say it. I don't think the Celtics are going to win this series. But this Celtics team is much improved over last year's team. And I watched last year's team a significant amount, and I watched this year's team a significant amount. And I would say that certainly that would be the team that I've watched the most this year. And you had the Isaiah Thomas injury, which was a little bit understated at the time, and we come to understand the significance of it a little bit later in the season. The Celtics did not have a go-to guy. They couldn't generate a lot of baskets. They had a Marcus Smart who was a year younger and not at quite what he is now. They had a Terry Rozier who was nowhere near what he is now. Jason Tatum was playing at Duke. Jaylen Brown was a rookie and not quite sure of himself. And we sort of saw what all the pieces that left Brad Stevens, how they sort of fell off. And so basically it was Kelly Olynyk versus LeBron James last year. And I think that while the Cavs are probably better because LeBron is one of the all-time greats, I think that when you have a Jason Tatum and a 21-year-old Jaylen Brown who's a little bit more confident, and you have a Terry Rozier who has come on and played tremendously well in Kyrie Irving's absence, what you have is a team that's much more capable of winning games. And they also have home court advantage, which when it comes to LeBron is not that big a deal. So while I don't think it's going to happen, I certainly think that the path is there for the Celtics to make this an interesting series, which I do think will happen, and then maybe to win this series, which I don't think will happen. But the building blocks are there, and it comes from the fact that this team is much better this year than they were last year. And just watch them a little bit more. Watch Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum is a phenomenal player, and I'm not saying that as a Celtics homer. I'm saying you're watching a 20-year-old kid just come into his own. He looks like Paul Pierce in year 4 as opposed to Paul Pierce in year 1. And I, as a Celtics fan, couldn't be more excited. But I think that Tatum is going to have a bigger impact on this series than any player, Al Horford included, had last year.
Yeah, I don't want to go too in depth. I mean, we could talk for a long time, I'm sure, but I want to highlight a couple of things very briefly. One is that I think home court advantage will matter because role players tend to play better at home, and I think young players tend to play better at home. And Boston has basically just those two categories of players. And I think that Cleveland has a lot of role players themselves, and they have played much better at home. I think that if Indiana had home court advantage in their first round matchup, that we may not have seen them get out of, the Cavs get out of the first round. I'm not saying that for sure, but I think it's possible because I think that Cleveland just hasn't played as well on the road either. And so I think that's an important factor. But two, the way that Cleveland tends to beat teams is that they figure out one action and they just ram it down the opposing team's throats over and over and over and over. And so you saw against the Raptors, they would have Kyle Korver and Kevin Love scream for each other in the corner. And the Raptors had no answer. Again and again and again, they didn't know how to guard that. They didn't know how to stop that from happening. Brad Stevens doesn't fall for that. I mean, I'm not trying to put Dwayne Casey down. He's an excellent coach, but I think in different areas than just pure in-game execution. And Brad Stevens right now is already going to know how to stop that action. And even if it gives up something else, he's going to make sure to stop that action. And then when the Cavaliers come up with something else and they're going to try to ram that down their throats, Brad Stevens is going to come up with the adjustment, whether that's a lineup, whether that's dropping a big man, having him step up, switching quickly on the back end. I think there's different ways, for Brad Stevens to change his defense, but he's going to do that. He's not going to let Cleveland to get away with doing the same thing over and over and over. And this Cavaliers offense is not refined enough to rotate through multiple different kinds of actions. And so I think you're going to see the Cleveland offense that looked so good against the Raptors bogged down quite a bit against the Celtics. And if you have that happen and you have the role players show up at home, I think Boston absolutely can make this a series. Now, LeBron has to be favored because one, he's LeBron, and two, we've got to make up for the fact that we doubted him earlier in the playoffs, and that was wrong. And look, Boston ultimately probably doesn't have the elite offensive talent it needs to keep up with Cleveland. But I mean, are we really going to start, keep on doubting Jason Tatum after everything he's done? Are we going to keep doubting Terry Rozier after he looks like, maybe a top 15 point guard in the league? That's crazy to say, but it's probably true, right? And Al Horford, maybe he can finally get his revenge against LeBron. So again, LeBron and the Cavs, they should definitely be favored here. But if Boston can push it to 6 or 7, I wouldn't be surprised. And in fact, I think it might honestly be kind of the obvious trajectory from what Boston's been doing so far.
Yeah, Josh, and you say we have to. You raise an interesting point when you say we have to pick LeBron because to make up for doubting him earlier in the playoffs, but. Did we really doubt him? I mean, everyone had the Cavs sweeping Indy or beating Indy in 5. And he almost lost that series on 3 or 4 different occasions. I mean, every single game that the Cavs won, Indy could have won. And the Pacers outscored them in the series, I believe. And I think the Pacers were the better team in that series. I think they beat themselves a lot with turnovers down the stretch and, things like not fouling LeBron at the end of Game 5. So, I think the Cavs could have been out right there. And then Toronto, if Toronto doesn't choke away Game 1, who knows what direction that goes. Boston's not making those mistakes. You guys brought up home court advantage. They're going to be at home for the first 2 games. Boston doesn't make mistakes, and they don't get scared. If nothing else, they will not be scared of LeBron. They will take the challenge head on. Even if they're down 20, they're not going to fold like we saw Toronto do. They're going to stay in the game. They're going to keep playing defense. They're going to keep shooting threes. Brad Stevens is going to keep making adjustments. I don't know what direction I'm going with the series. When we started this segment, I said, we all have Cleveland. I don't really know why I said that. I don't know what direction I'm going with this series yet. I probably will end up picking the Cavs, but I have not decided.
Counterpoint, as a longtime Celtics fan, LeBron has a gear that he apparently just keeps in reserve until he comes to Boston. And the game I'm going to point to talk about that is Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals in 2012, where the Heat had come off that where they had lost to the Mavs before, and it looked like it might not work out, and the Celtics took a big lead. I think they were up 3-2, and then LeBron just kind of went supernova, and it was like the first real time besides what had happened in 07 with the 48 special. That year in 2012, particularly in the shadow of 2011, where LeBron looked really, really bad in that finals. And I think that's something we have to talk about at some point when we talk about LeBron's legacy, is how bad that 2011 finals looked. But that year, he just went to a whole nother level, a level that he didn't have against any other team, that he didn't bring it quite the same way. Maybe it's the city, maybe it's the colors, maybe he just doesn't like Kelly Green. I don't know. But LeBron has this reserve that he keeps in the tank for the Celtics, and he tends to break that out the exact right moment. And while I love this Celtics team and I will root for them very, very hard, I don't see a situation where we don't see at least 2 or 3 games where you go like, even the 40-point, 13 assists, 17 rebound stat line doesn't describe what LeBron did. He showed that against Indiana. He showed it against Toronto. And I feel like he just keeps this next level burst in the chamber when it comes to playing Boston, because he tends to over and over and over really, really just shut the door on the Celtics. And I think that's probably what's going to happen here, as well as the Celtics have played. And I think that the Celtics offense is incredibly complex, and I think it's going to give Cleveland fits. But at the end of the day, it's very hard for me to look past LeBron James and say that any team short of the Warriors is going to really give him a lot of trouble when he is probably at his absolute apex, which is crazy to say in year 15 at age 33.
And I think we need to be careful here. Just 10 days ago, we got excited about this young team that was like stepping up and was proving it in the playoffs and had blown out an opponent in 5 games to advance to the next round. And that was Philadelphia. And then what happened? Things caught up to them. They played a more better coached team that executed better in Boston, and they just didn't match up as well against them, and they lost in 5. So I think Boston has been very impressive, but I think we may get a little too excited about how good they've looked this far. It did take them 7 games to beat Joe Prunty. We talked about that earlier. So I think we want to just pump the brakes a little bit. This Boston team has played exceptionally well, but I think they are playing over their heads at least a little bit, maybe not much, but a little bit. And I just think that LeBron's going to kind of feed them a little bit of medicine.
Yeah, and, it should be said, I did talk about how Cleveland could have lost in the first round on multiple occasions. A couple things go differently in the second round, and that series is still going on. Game 3, Game 5, even Game 2 for that matter. So yeah, basing things on past results in this year's postseason, probably a little bit foolhardy. Guys, do we have anything else, or should we close out? We've been going at this for what if we count those first 7 minutes when
we're like an hour and a half.
Yeah, like an hour and a half. Yeah. Anything else here? Anything you want to plug before we sign off?
We are making great strides on the draft guide. We dropped our top 50. Well, it's our top 49 because Jae Foster dropped out while we were working on the guide. So our top 49 is out. We have a huge, huge edition that is going to be coming on this week after the draft lottery, which is on this coming Tuesday. We're going to put out a really huge edition that I think is going to be really a nice resource for NBA fans. So make sure to check out the guide, check out all the work that has already been done by Patrick Oxford, Will Walker, Staki Raleigh, and myself. And make sure to stay tuned because I promise you big things are coming.
Yeah, and if you guys are trying to find draft prospect scouting videos that are, digestible, and you search online, you're not going to find them unless you're looking on the 94 Feet Report YouTube channel. So, I've been delving into my draft research, which consists of just watching film that other people have put together. And I've been using the draft guide. So you should do the same unless you're want to spend the hours poring over film that these guys have. How's that?
Yeah, so I don't have it some impressive, but I did write a piece on the 94 Feet Report called the NBA Playoffs, Why Everything We Thought We Knew Is Wrong. And so I think you should definitely check that out. We've had a lot of other great pieces about the Rockets that have dropped recently as well on the site. They've been really good. And so definitely check out the content there. And then if you've got a little bit extra time, I'm jumping in on a lot of different pieces over at Hoops Habit. I know Simon is cranking out a bunch of game takeaways pretty much every day. He's writing something new about the Warriors. So definitely check that out there. Really great playoff coverage happening more on the day-by-day side while we're doing some of the bigger picture stuff over here at 94 Feet Report.
Yeah, I already got my plugs in throughout the show.
Yeah, you did.
Shameless.
That's all we have for you guys. Great show today. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. Follow us at the 94 Feet Report. Tweet at us your questions next time, please. I mean, I don't even know who's still watching, but if you're still watching, I don't know why you didn't tweet at us. So
we had a couple of people. We were getting some YouTube questions. We're going to try and work those in. I have to say thank you to everybody who is still watching. Thank you if you're watching this video. This is a learning curve for us. We really love doing this. I know that particularly the three of us, Josh, Simon, and myself, we love doing this show. We love being a part of the NBA community, and it's a learning curve. I mean, we just picked up 2 new subscribers just this moment. They just popped up on one of my screens that we picked up 2 new subscribers. So shout out to Benjamin Schneer. You should never do this on live TV. And shout out to Crenton, who's just subscribed. We picked up 2 new ones, and that's really awesome. And thanks to you guys for watching. But if there's anything you think we can improve, if you want to talk about something, make sure and just hit us up at the 94 Feet Report. You can hit me up at Alex West NBA. You can hit the show up, whatever it takes. We're just glad to have an audience, and hopefully it's going to grow, and we're going to learn how to do this a little bit better. But thank you for watching while you do. Simon, you want to take us home?
I thought I already did. But, thanks for watching, guys. This was a great discussion. Next week, I'll be out, but I know you guys can hold it down without me. I'm just breaking this news to Alex.
I was going to say that I just found this out.
That's another thing you should never do on the air. So, great way to end the show. We'll talk to you. Someone will talk to you next week.
Yeah, you're fired. See ya.
You're watching The Swingmen, presented by the 94 Feet Report.